5 years ago, I stood in front of my closest friends and family, beaming as I said, "I do," to the man I believed was the love of my life. At 30 years old, I thought I had found my soulmate. My husband, who was 32 at the time, was charming, ambitious, and full of dreams. He was an actor struggling to make a name for himself, but his passion and determination inspired me. I admired his drive, and I loved him deeply. Our relationship moved quickly. We had dated for just under 2 years when he proposed, and I accepted without hesitation. By then, I was already working as a surgeon, a demanding career that came with financial stability. My husband's career, on the other hand, was far from steady. He picked up the occasional role, mostly as an extra, but nothing substantial came his way. Despite his limited income, he never gave up on his dream of becoming a successful actor. I admired his resilience and wanted to support him in any way I could. So, I took on most of the financial responsibilities in our marriage. I paid for our rent, utilities, groceries, and even his personal expenses when necessary. I didn't see it as a burden. I genuinely believed in him and wanted to see him succeed. The early years of our marriage were filled with laughter, love, and hope. Although his career wasn't taking off as quickly as he had hoped, we were happy together, or so I thought. I encouraged him to keep pursuing his dreams, even as I worked long hours at the hospital to provide for us. Then, 6 months ago, things began to change. After years of struggle, he landed a small role in a feature film. His screen time was limited to about 10 or 15 minutes, but it was his first speaking role in a major production. For him, it was a significant breakthrough, and I was ecstatic. We celebrated the news together, and I felt proud to have played a part in helping him reach this milestone. For a while, everything seemed perfect. I thought this role would be the start of a successful career for him, and I was excited to see what the future held. But that excitement was short-lived. 5 days ago, my husband blindsided me with divorce papers. I remember the moment vividly. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. He sat me down, looked me in the eyes, and said, "I don't love you anymore." His words were like a dagger to my heart. I couldn't understand what had gone wrong. We had just celebrated his achievement. We were supposed to be happy. I begged him to explain, and his response only deepened my confusion and pain. "I need to focus on my career," he said coldly. "This is just the beginning for me, and I need a fresh start. I can't carry the baggage of my old life anymore." Baggage. That's how he described me, his wife of 5 years, the woman who had stood by him through all his struggles, who had sacrificed so much to support him. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I pleaded with him to reconsider, to think about everything we had built together, but he was unmoved. His decision was final. He packed a suitcase that same day and left, leaving me sitting on the couch, stunned and heartbroken. The days that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I couldn't eat, sleep, or focus on anything. I called out of work and spent most of my time in bed, replaying his words over and over in my mind. How could he throw away everything we had? How could he give up on our marriage so easily? I kept hoping it was all a mistake, that he would come back and tell me he had changed his mind. But that hope dwindled with each passing day. Then, on the 5th day, he called me. I remember the mix of emotions I felt when I saw his name on my phone: relief, anger, sadness, and a tiny spark of hope. Maybe he had realized he made a mistake. Maybe he wanted to come home. But that wasn't why he was calling. "Hey," he said casually, as if nothing had happened. "I need a favor." A favor. I clenched my teeth as he explained what he wanted. He had a meeting the next day and needed me to drop off some formal clothes at his friend's apartment, where he was staying. Despite my anger and heartbreak, I agreed. Part of me wanted to see him in person, to talk to him face to face and maybe get some answers. When I arrived at his friend's apartment, the door was slightly ajar. I could hear voices inside. My husband and his friend were talking. Just as I raised my hand to knock, I froze. His friend asked a question that sent a chill down my spine. If you never planned on staying with her, why did you marry her in the first place? I felt my breath catch in my throat as I stood frozen outside the door. My mind raced. What did his friend mean by, never planned on staying? I pressed myself closer to the wall, trying to steady my breathing, and strained to hear the conversation inside. Then I heard my husband laugh. It wasn't the warm, joyful laugh I'd fallen in love with, it was cruel, detached, and dripping with arrogance. You want to know why I married her, he said, his tone casual, almost amused. It wasn't because I loved her, that's for sure. My heart dropped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But he wasn't done. Her dad is a top dentist, right? One of the best in the state. And guess who one of his closest clients is? That big-name actor I told you about. Marrying her was the easiest way to get close to him. I mean, sure, she's rich, smart, and kind, but I didn't really care about any of that. All I cared about was making the right connections. I felt the blood drain from my face. Was this the same man I had spent the last 5 years loving and supporting? He continued, oblivious to my presence just outside the door. I knew her dad would introduce me eventually, and once that happened, I could finally get my career moving. It took longer than I thought, but hey, it worked. At his 50th birthday party, I finally met the guy. And look at where I am now, I landed that movie role because of him. His friend sounded skeptical. But what about her? You've been married for 5 years. You're just going to throw that away now? Of course, my husband replied dismissively. She served her purpose. There's no point in sticking around anymore. I need to focus on my career, and she's just baggage at this point. I can't have her holding me back. Baggage. That word again. It felt like a slap in the face, worse than the first time he had said it, but the worst was yet to come. He chuckled before adding, and between you and me, I've been with other women during our marriage. Parties, sets, you name it. She never suspected a thing. She was too busy working those long hours at the hospital to notice. My stomach turned, and I fought the urge to burst into the room and confront him right then and there. But I didn't. I needed to hear everything. His friend sounded uneasy. Man, that's cold. You're really okay with all this? Why wouldn't I be? My husband replied, his tone flippant. This is Hollywood, man. You do what you have to do to make it. Besides, she'll be fine. She's a surgeon. She'll land on her feet. That was it. I couldn't listen anymore. I turned and walked back to my car, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. As I drove home, tears streamed down my face. How could I have been so blind? How could I have given my heart to someone so selfish and manipulative? By the time I reached my apartment, my sadness had transformed into something else, rage. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was furious. I had spent years supporting this man, sacrificing my time, energy, and money to help him chase his dreams, only to find out that I had been nothing more than a pawn in his game. That night, as I sat in my living room replaying his words in my head, I made a decision. I wouldn't let him get away with this. The first step was to call my father's client, the actor my husband had been so desperate to impress. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if this was the right thing to do. But then I remembered everything my husband had said, and the hesitation vanished that I picked up the phone and dialed the number. The conversation was awkward at first. The actor's assistant answered, and I had to explain who I was and why I was calling. Eventually, I was put through to the actor himself. I introduced myself and took a deep breath before launching into the story. I told him everything, how my husband had manipulated me to get close to him, how he had used my family's connections to land his role, and how he had cheated on me throughout our marriage. To my surprise, the actor listened intently. When I finished, there was a long pause before he said, "I had no idea. Thank you for telling me this. I'll take care of it." I wasn't sure what he meant by, "take care of it," but I thanked him and hung up, feeling a strange mix of relief and anxiety. The next evening, my husband called me. His voice was frantic. "What did you do?" he demanded. I played dumb. "What are you talking about?" "I got dropped from the film," he shouted. "They said the director doesn't want me anymore. This was my big break, and you ruined it." Hearing the panic in his voice gave me a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in days. "You should have thought about that before using me," I replied coldly. He tried to argue, but I hung up before he could say more. For the first time in a week, I felt like I had taken back some of the power he had stolen from me. The next day, he showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to find him standing there, looking disheveled and desperate. "Please," he said, his voice trembling. "I made a mistake. I didn't mean any of it. I love you. Give me another chance." I stared at him, incredulous. Did he really think I would fall for his lies again? "You don't love me," I said firmly. "You love what I could do for you. And now that's gone. Goodbye." I slammed the door in his face and leaned against it, feeling a strange mix of sadness and empowerment. But this wasn't the end of his harassment. Even after I shut the door in his face, my husband refused to give up. Over the next several days, he bombarded me with calls, texts, and emails, begging me to fix the damage I had caused to his career. At first, I blocked his number and ignored his messages. But then he started creating new accounts to contact me through social media. The messages ranged from desperate pleas to angry rants. One moment, he would beg for forgiveness, claiming that he had made a terrible mistake and couldn't live without me. The next, he would lash out in anger, accusing me of ruining his life and threatening to take everything from me in the divorce. I tried to brush it off, but the constant harassment was wearing me down. Every time I thought I was starting to heal, another message would pop up, dragging me back into the chaos. Then, one night, things took a darker turn. I was leaving work late, exhausted from a long shift at the hospital, when I noticed a figure standing near my car in the dimly lit parking lot. As I got closer, I realized it was my husband. Before I could react, he opened the passenger door and slid into the car, locking the doors behind him. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. He turned to me, his expression calm but unsettling. "I just want to talk," he said. "You've destroyed everything I worked for. The least you can do is help me fix it." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to stay calm. "There's nothing to fix," I said. "You brought this on yourself." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing tone. "You don't understand. If I don't get that role back, I have nothing. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to call your dad's client and convince him to give me another chance." I shook my head. "That's not going to happen." His eyes narrowed. "Don't make me do something we'll both regret." At that moment, I knew I had to act fast. My purse was sitting on the passenger seat, and inside was my pepper spray. I glanced at it briefly, hoping he wouldn't notice. "I'll call him," I lied. "But I need my phone. It's in my bag." He hesitated for a moment, then handed me the bag. As soon as it was in my hands, I grabbed the pepper spray and unleashed it on him, emptying half the canister directly into his face. He screamed, clutching his eyes as he gasped for air. I didn't waste a second. I unlocked the doors, shoved him out of the car, and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest police station. Shaking and barely able to think straight, I filed a report and pressed charges against him for harassment and attempted intimidation. The next few hours were a blur. I was still in shock from what had happened, but the officers assured me that I had done the right thing. By the time I left the station, they had already located and arrested him. In the days that followed, I took steps to protect myself. I moved out of my apartment and back in with my parents, who were furious when they learned what my husband had done. My father, who had been supportive but relatively calm up until this point, was ready to confront him personally. It took everything I had to convince him to let the legal system handle it. I also sold my house and car, changed my phone number, and deleted my social media accounts. I wanted to make it as difficult as possible for my husband to find me again. Meanwhile, the charges against him moved quickly through the legal system. At his trial, he showed no remorse, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in his life. But the evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was sentenced to 3 months in jail along with a hefty fine. The divorce was finalized soon after. To my relief, he wasn't entitled to any compensation or assets, and I was free to move on with my life. I began working at a new hospital closer to my parents' home, and I started therapy to process everything I had been through. The sessions were difficult at first, but over time, they helped me understand that none of this was my fault. I had been manipulated and betrayed by someone I loved, but I refused to let that define me. I also began to rediscover parts of myself that I had lost during my marriage. For years, I had been so focused on supporting my husband that I had neglected my own dreams and interests. Now, I was finally putting myself first. Though the scars of his betrayal remain, I am slowly learning to heal. There are days when the memories creep back in, his laughter as he dismissed our marriage, his threats in the parking lot, but I remind myself that I am stronger than what he put me through. If there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's that betrayal doesn't define your worth. I gave my heart to someone who didn't deserve it, but that doesn't mean I am any less valuable or deserving of love. For now, I'm taking life one day at a time. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm hopeful. And that's enough. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be the first to have radish and real stories with you. Have a great day.